Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and it's my pleasure to have Dennis Scott with us. Two-time Grammy Award-winning songwriter, producer, writer, performer, Dennis Scott has left no corner of the children's music industry unexplored. His songs have been performed by such diverse artists as Faith Hill, Ray Charles, Sugarland, Alison Krauss, The Muppets, Amy Grant, CeCe Winans, Trisha Yearwood, Donna Summer, Charlie Daniels Band, Sherry Lewis, John Cicada, Roberta Flack, Tanya Tucker, and many more. He's won a Grammy, an Emmy, and a Parents' Choice Award and has been nominated for Christian Music's Dove Award. You hear his work on radio, television, stage, audiobooks, home video, recordings, and CD. He writes, produces, and composes custom songs and music for all aspects of the entertainment industry. Dennis, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Listening to you going over my credits, it's like watching my life flash before my eyes.
And I'm sure I've left a lot of famous names off of the list too. So I'm curious if there's one project or client in particular, one artist that just pops off the page or out of the ether for you. Is like, wow, that was quite an incredible experience.
Yeah, I would have to say, just off the top of my head, that getting to work with Mickey Dolenz from the Monkees was probably as close to an out-of-body experience as I could get, because growing up, I mean, I loved the Beatles. I play in a Beatles band, but the Monkees were pretty high up there for me too. And to be standing next to this gentleman who, I sort of idolized growing up, and me conducting him and telling him, okay, sing now and stop singing. And it's like, what happened here? And my favorite story was when I got into the car to leave for the airport to go to the recording session from Nashville to LA. I turned on the ignition, the radio came on, and what was playing but Last Train to Clarksville. So that was a sign.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many signs. I love how the universe works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Awesome. So what got you started? Like, what was the spark, the thing that turned this into such a lifelong passion for you?
Well, it depends on how far back you want to go. I was actually a child actor growing up. At age 7, I was in a Broadway show in the chorus, but I was still a Broadway show. I continued on that path for a long time until I realized that it was very tough. I fell into music and started to enjoy that more. Like you say, the universe works in strange ways. I started getting into songwriting, and I had written a novelty song called Captain Kirk's Disco Trek, which is a lot of fun, but a hard song to sell because novelty songs don't come on the radio that often these days. So I took it around, and somebody said, well, why don't you take it to a children's record label, which I did. They didn't want it either, but they did say that they liked my writing and would I like to try writing some parody songs for them for a project they had, and I did. And that turned out pretty good. And I thought, well, all right, now what do I do? And I took that album to Sesame Street, which had its own record label at the time. And they said, well, we kind of like what you're doing, but we don't have anything for you right now. Why don't you come into the office a few days a week and put on a tie and a jacket and try to find us some artists for this new project we have in mind, which was a Sesame Street Goes Country album. And so without getting paid or anything like that, I did that, and I got them Glenn Campbell and Tanya Tucker and Loretta Lynn and Crystal Gale. When the time came, the president of the record label said, hey, do you want to produce this? I had never produced a real album before. I had produced my own songwriting demos, but nothing like that. But my mother said, never say no. So I said, of course, I'd love to do that. And I had to get professional in a hurry. And that was my first Grammy Award. So I thought, okay, this is a very good place to be in. I enjoy it. And look what has happened so far. So that's my story.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, so there's this adage about all growth happens outside of your comfort zone. So being willing to go outside your comfort zone and try new things, say yes to things that you have no experience doing. That's gutsy.
Yeah, that has been my. I think that's been my experience throughout my career, pretty much, and that's also the dream or the nightmare that I have sometimes, that I'll get to a gig and I didn't bring my guitar, or I'll get to a recording session and I forgot the music. That hasn't happened, thank goodness, but I guess somewhere in the back of my mind it lurks.
Mm. It's kind of like the artist version of the nightmare of showing up forgetting to have worn pants. Just
Exactly.
realize it. Yeah.
I think I've had
Uh,
pants in all these dreams, so that's good. That's a good
yeah.
start.
Yeah. Awesome. And let's talk a bit about Mr. Rogers.
Hmm. I
He,
love that.
yeah, such an inspirational person and soul to graced our planet and given us so many lessons, life lessons, and help us to steer generations of kids in the right direction. And yeah, I'd love to hear your take on Mr. Rogers and how you got involved with his mission, and what kind of thoughts you have about his the movie about him and everything.
Hmm. Well, I have to say that I grew up at a time when I was a little past the Mr. Rogers show. However, in the course of doing two albums about him, plus a video celebrating his birthday, and right now an audiobook which features everyday people that I interviewed telling their experiences about Mr. Rogers, their encounters with him, people who received letters from him, and attention from a man who is, I'm sure, very busy. He answered every letter that he got to his show personally, and he changed people's lives. And I've spoken to the people whose lives that he changed, and you know, there are really few people, I think, in this world, and especially in this industry, that you can say had such an intimate relationship with hundreds of thousands of people over the years. And my involvement started innocently. I happened to be watching the television, and a rerun of Mr. Rogers' show came on, and it was him singing this beautiful song called "It's You I Like." I said, "Wow, that's a great little song. I wonder who wrote it." After a little research, I found out that he wrote that song plus all the 200 songs that aired on his show. I thought, well, I wonder if anybody else besides Mr. Rogers has recorded this. And lo and behold, nobody had. And I thought, this is just an opportunity. I couldn't let go of it. I got some people to help me with the project, to help underwrite it. And we got all these different artists singing Mr. Rogers songs, putting their stamps on it. Some of the people you mentioned, like Donna Summer and, oh my gosh, Amy Grant, all these people, and made it special. I'm not that it wasn't special, but it gave it a whole different light to how musical it was, how it worked as an adult song, as well as being a children's song, and even the message held up as an adult message. And so long story short, I was a little afraid after doing this that the Mr. Rogers people would be, well, what have you done with his songs? These are not the way Fred did them. But then I spoke with his wife, Mrs. Rogers, and she said, you know what? I just listened to this. I love it, and Fred would have loved it. And that's all I needed to hear. Because he truly loved music. He truly loved songwriting, and he was good at it. He was a true craftsman. And I think people don't appreciate or don't understand how important that was and how good he was at it, because it came in the guise of being a children's song, and people have a tendency to dismiss children's songs. But when you listen to these songs, and with the treatment that we gave it, you get to appreciate his skills as a writer. I know this is a long-winded answer to your question, but then came another album, and in the second album, it was less of a challenge of turning his songs into more pop songs and different styled songs, but more of really getting to know him through his music and appreciating him as a human being through his music.
Yeah, awesome. And so you'd never met him in person, but
No,
yeah. How
never
about
had
his
the
wife,
pleasure.
his widow? Did you ever meet her?
Oh yeah,
Hmm.
we were actually got to be friends and stayed in contact, and she was very supportive of the project. Now, unfortunately, she's passed away. My only complaint is that I don't see enough attention being paid to Fred's music in his new productions, which are being done by people other than Fred. But I feel honored that I got to meet her and spend some time with her and other people on the cast, like Mr. McFeely. We are friends now. We stay in touch.
Oh, that's wonderful. When I was little, I watched a bit of Mister Rogers. Yeah, loved how kind he was to everybody. He was really cutting edge when you think about what he was facing in terms of social pressures and so forth. To have people of color on the show and so forth was a big deal back when he kind of pushed that issue and made sure that there was diversity on his program. That was pretty brave.
Indeed, he was the real deal. He walked the walk. This audiobook I was telling you about, listening to the stories of people, how he affected their lives in ways that I don't know. I mean, maybe you can be affected that way through a certain movie or a certain show or a certain book, but he was completely hands on, and I can't think of anybody who would take the time to do that these days.
And speaking of books and movies and things that make an impression on us, what's made an impression on you? And I'll go first to give you an example. I loved the movie Contact. Humanizing isn't the right word, but making approachable and accessible extraterrestrials, that we can dream about first contact to be something that's not silly and not horribly violent and ends in the world's destruction, but something that is scientifically plausible and makes us better as a human race. So I just really was inspired by that movie. But what's an example of something that sticks in your mind as made a big impression?
I have to say, when I think about it, I'm a pretty motivated, self motivated guy, and I go after different projects and relish doing them. But working on Mr. Rogers, I think it affected me more than I realized. I think I've lately, since working on both albums, tried to be a better person because I saw what he was and I saw the good in the world that he was doing. I think I take that with me now. It wasn't just a one time deal. I did this album and now move on to the next one. I find myself quoting him. I find myself thinking about, I wonder what Fred would say about that. I have to say, it really did change my life too.
Yeah, awesome. Did you see the movie Won't You Be My Neighbor?
I did.
Yeah,
I did. I thought they did a great job with it.
yeah, me too. Yeah. What would be a project that you might not made huge waves with, but that you think there's something special about it? And let me give you something to consider. That's actually your project and how I found out about you. The Safety Pup uh, album.
Wow.
I know. So my oldest daughter is 31, and she loved those songs. Loved, loved,
Oh
loved them.
my.
Yeah. So now we have my wife now, and I have a 3-year-old son, and so my My first daughter, she's telling me, oh, you should get this book and this and that, and she just brought up Safety Pup. And like that was such a big thing for me. She loved it. I was like, um, yeah, really really special. So we have no idea how big the ripple effect is that we make by our good works in the world. But yeah, that's just a small example of a ripple reaching out to the eventually to me through my daughter Chloe.
Well, you're so right about that because I've actually gotten letters from people, not tons of them, but every once in a while there'll be something that comes up regarding Safety Pup or some other project I've done. And it just catches me by surprise. I think, well, how could anybody even know about this? And it's people who were kids and have grown up, um, which partly reveals my age, but it is gratifying to see that, that something you did actually had an influence or helped somebody in some way, or they just enjoyed it. Even that's okay. And I get that on several projects. One is the one you mentioned. Another is a song I wrote or co-wrote that got onto an episode of Who's the Boss, and Ray Charles sang it. And I still get letters from people saying, hey, can I use this for my wedding? Or it's a song called Always a Friend. And people want to use it for different occasions. And sometimes they can't even find the music, and I'm happy to help them because I'd like to see the song continue, and I'd like to see it help other people as well.
So what did you win a Grammy for, and what did you win an Emmy for?
There were 2 Grammys. One was the Sesame Street country album that I mentioned. Mm-hmm. And the second one was my first Mr. Rogers album called Songs from the Neighborhood, the Music of Mr. Rogers. That was in 2006. Emmy was for a children's, not a cartoon, it was a puppet series called The Trolleys, based on the Trolleys character, and wrote all new songs for it and had new characters, and it won, I think, for best composition. I have to look at my wall here. What does it say here? There we go. Yeah, for best original composition, I think.
That's awesome. And what about audiobooks? Because I think that's part of your portfolio of work as well, right?
Well, audiobooks, which if you go back, it was I originally started working with read-along books, which had a cassette packaged with it, and you flip the pages. Did a whole number of them for a record label called Peter Pan Records, which were originally golden records, those little gold discs that you would play that made out of plastic. That's kind of where that started. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but
got it. Okay. And are any of any of these things like collectibles that you might see on eBay and things like that sell for a lot of money?
I'm laughing because every once in a while somebody calls me up and says, "Hey, I found your Sesame album in the bargain bin here at Walmart's or someplace," and I just have to laugh at that. And $1.99 or something. Yeah, things are still out there. But when I look at, I try to keep a sample of the product of things that I work on, and I have it all on a shelf in another room, and I see the progression of my career starts with vinyl, then goes to cassettes, and then goes to VHSs, and then goes to digital, and now we're at audiobooks, which is kind of where you left off. New Mr. Rogers album called Mr. Rogers Now More Than Ever. That's actually my first, no, I take it back, my second foray into the audiobook world. The first one was an album which actually won a Grammy, was nominated for a Grammy in the spoken word category. And it was more like an audiobook than anything else. I mentioned I play in a Beatles band. And so I got the idea to interview people who were Beatles fans like myself, because they all have incredible stories too. I thought these stories are just jewels. They need to be heard. And there's never been an album or an audio product that tells the Beatles story from the fans' perspective. And such great stories, funny stories, touching stories. And we got Louise Harrison, George Harrison's big sister, to narrate it, which is probably as close to a Beatle as I'll ever get. So that was the first product. By the way, I should say, as a follow-up, we lost in the category to Betty White, who had an audiobook out that year, which is not the worst thing in the world. We wrote a song called the Betty White Song, and you can watch it on YouTube. But it was our little cathartic way of expressing our experience losing to Betty White. More recently, this audiobook that I was telling you about, that, well, it's been submitted for a Grammy. We don't know how it'll do, but I hope, I just hope people listen to it because they'll appreciate the stories about Mr. Rogers, again, from the fans' perspective. So I think I unwittingly created a business model for some of these audio products because I like hearing the stories behind the songs and the stories behind the people who encountered the artist. So,
well, there's a whole category I don't know a lot about, but it's called fan fiction.
oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah. It's
Where is
fictional
that?
writing written in an amateur capacity by fans, unauthorized by, but based on an existing work of fiction. So if you can do that with fiction, and that's a thing, fan fiction is a pretty big thing. Why not have something along those lines, but based on music?
Yep. Or non-fiction fans.
Right.
I do like
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
I'll have it on your desk by tomorrow morning. I say that in just because I've had requests for people who needed something very quickly. In fact, I want to say it was, well, I worked on a children's TV series called Noddy, Noddy, Naughty, not naughty.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on PBS for a couple of years. And there was one time the schedule got mixed up and they needed a Christmas song written and recorded and in their hands by the next day. And they were filming in Canada. So I didn't even think it was possible, but we went ahead and we got it done unbelievably. And I drove to the airport and I actually got out of my car and walked onto the tarmac where I saw the Federal Express jet. And I waved it up in the air. I said, please, you have to take this. And amazingly they did. And amazingly, they didn't arrest me. So.
Wow. And they actually took it and you made the deadline.
Made the deadline.
Amazing. So how do you get the inspiration to create something that's it is a creative work. It's something that you can't just pull it out of thin air. It comes from somewhere, right? It comes from the quantum field or something. And how do you get these lyrics? How do you get the melodies? How does this all come together, and how can you pull it together so quickly on a deadline when they say they need it tomorrow?
I think it's some sort of controlled creativity or channeled creativity, because as you say, when you have a deadline like that, you don't have the luxury of, oh, I'll work on this for a couple of days and then I'll take a drive into the country and then I'll come back and do that again. You really have to say, all right, I use a legal pad. I'm old school in that way. And I'll just start brainstorming ideas, and I'll have about 15 ideas that are all usable, but I don't have the luxury of, well, I'll work on this one for a while, see how that works. I'll work on you just have to make a decision, have faith that this is the right decision, and go for it. And that's basically how I operate. And I'm lucky that I have a great musical resource or a background to pull from, because I loved all sorts of music growing up. I was very fond of theater music as well as pop music. When I get a little bit uninspired, I'll put on a Beatles song and say, well, they did that. I can do that. Well, maybe not always as good, but um, at least honoring them in that way, by doing what they did. When they went into the studio, they gave them 2 days to, or maybe even one day, to record an entire album. So I have a little bit more luxury than that most of the time, but not always.
Mm-hmm. I recently learned that the book The Alchemist was
Mm-hmm.
written in 12 days. It sold 150 million copies, and it was written in 12 days.
Wow.
That blows my mind.
Yeah, I know there are some songwriters, especially in Nashville. They'll say, "Oh, well, I got the inspiration. It came to me in 5 minutes, or it wrote itself." For me, it's a little bit more work. I mean, every once in a while, I'll get a snippet of an idea that I like, and I don't know where it came from. Paul McCartney, I know I keep mentioning the Beatles, but he wrote "Yesterday" in his sleep, is what he says, and it was such a good song. He didn't believe he had actually come up with it. He thought maybe he had heard it from somewhere else and it's somebody else's song. And he kept asking everyone, have you ever heard this song? And said, no, it sounds new to me. So, and the rest is history there. I think every once in a while, an idea, a musical idea comes to me, and I try to use it as soon as possible for whatever I've got.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't. I don't really write songs for me, or if I'm outside and it's a pretty day. I tend to be a guy who writes to an assignment, even if it's a self-imposed assignment. I need a goal. I need a deadline.
Yeah, I think it's Parkinson's law that says that the project will fit the deadline and parameters, time parameters that you give it. So you give somebody an hour to complete the task, and they'll complete it in an hour. If you give them 25 hours, they'll do it in 25 hours. It's the same thing, same task.
It sounds like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a project I'm working on now. I was given the assignment at the beginning of the year, and normally I'll get on something right away, but no one's ever given me that kind of leeway. So I took advantage of it and did some traveling and things with my family. But now I'm a little bit paying for the price, because I see the clock ticking, and I know that December will be here shortly, and then there are things that get in the way, and there are holidays, and so I'm now burning the midnight oil a little bit more to make that deadline. And so I think next time somebody gives me that kind of leeway, I'll say, can you? It doesn't have to be in the contract, but just tell me you really want this in 2 months, and that you'll get it in a year, but I need the 2-month deadline.
Yeah, having an open-ended deadline is not good for getting stuff done, is it?
Not for me.
Yeah. So, what was the song that was nominated for the Christian Music Dove Award?
I don't know if that was a song or an album. I worked on a collection of albums for United Methodist Church, and each one had a slightly different theme. I'm embarrassed to say I would have to look it up to see which album it was, but it's a fair statement, because I did, over the years that I worked with them, I'm going to say at least 150 songs or so, spread out between all these different albums. I'll take whatever grace you can give me and say I don't remember which one it was, but it was really good.
It was really good. Did
and
you
it should have won,
lyrics, or did they provide you with the words, and then you just had to come up with the melodies to go with it?
No, they told me, like, here's a story about Noah we need a story about Samson or whatever it is, and then I would immerse myself in the story and try to come up with something that was fun for the kids, that didn't necessarily pound them over the head with teaching something, but would instinctively or subliminally instill the message of the story to them. And I try to do that, whenever I can. I don't believe in writing down to kids. I think I'd rather raise the bar a little higher and let them reach for it. And most of the time they do.
Mm-hmm. So let's take the example of Samsung. How would
Okay.
you go about taking that story and turning it into a song that teaches a lesson that isn't beating the person over the head with the moral of the story, and is memorable and catchy?
Well, thinking back to that story, well, first of all, I would say that I take advantage of all the musical influences that I've had, and I know what songs have a beat that makes me react to it, or fun listening to, and just so catchy and hooky. And a lot of that music resides in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. So in this case of Samson, I thought, wouldn't it be kind of fun if we had kind of like a 60s girl group singing this song about Samson? And so I brainstormed and I came up with the title, Samson's Got a Secret. And it's kind of like, if you can imagine the Supremes, Samson's got a secret, and that led to more lyrics and more music. And it's danceable, it's funny, it's tells the story too, without, I mean, in these cases, I had to assume that in the classroom, kids were already reading the story.
Mm-hmm.
So they've heard what the story is. They don't need me to tell them again what the story is. So I just kind of say, let's have fun with this. And the result, I think I was pretty happy with that song.
That's cool. I particularly like the story of Samson. My son just turned 3, and he still has yet to have his hair cut. In Judaism, having your child get their hair cut at age 3 and not before is something that has some spiritual roots to it, kind of like the Samson story in the Bible. If
Hmm.
if you can imagine, the hair is like, they're like straws, and they're sucking in the surrounding light. So there's light that fills your vessel, uh, and there's light that doesn't get into your vessel because it's already full. So
Hmm.
it's destined for you. Work on increasing the size of your vessel, being a better and better person increases that vessel so you can take in more and more light. Well, there's surrounding light around you that's meant for you, and you can take some of that in with your long hair. Is kind of like the spiritual concept behind it. I think there's something to it. So, anyways, we
Yeah.
still haven't cut his hair yet. He just turned 3 a week ago, and he really likes it, and my wife really likes it too. So I don't know that he's going to get it cut anytime soon, but when
There
people
you go.
ask about his hair, I'll bring up the Samson story from the Bible. Yeah,
There you go. It works every time.
yeah, yeah. So let's talk more generally about teaching kids morals and good behavior, and what's right and what's true and all that, and doing it in a musical way. What would be some of the key ingredients for success here, and maybe a few examples too?
Well, as I said, I think step one is to not write down or speak down to the
Yeah.
kids, because that'll turn them off and the rest is lost. So hopefully the parents are doing their job and not leaving everything to the songs and the music and the writers and the TV shows. Putting that aside, just I think our job really is to reinforce, what the kids learn at home. Hopefully it's those things that you mentioned, how to be a good person, and how to share and how to cooperate. And some people write songs that are specifically I'm going to write a song about cooperation, and they'll say cooperation's good, and I always try to find some back door to write the song or make a statement lyrically that doesn't say what it is. Like if you're going to write a song about love, instead of writing I love you, I love you, I love you, what about some sort of story that reveals how that happened, or how you love somebody and why you love somebody, as opposed to just blatantly saying it. So I try to keep a little alarm in my head and say, nah, throw that out. That's not going to work. I have an assignment, a possible assignment, I shouldn't say that, with a pretty well-known children's artist from the 80s and 90s. He has a laundry list of things that he wants to include on his album, songs about emotions. And that's going to pose an interesting challenge because, again, I don't want to say, I feel angry, angry, angry. I want to find some way of expressing that is less direct and will convey the same type of thing. So we'll see what happens with that.
Cool. Well, going back to the Safety Pup projects that you've done, those are some catchy songs. And like I said, my daughter was reminiscing about them. And one that pops to mind is about smoking and how bad smoking is. And it wasn't like hit the kid over the head with it sort of thing. It was subtle enough that they didn't feel like it was propaganda, but it was catchy.
Or propaganda.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Safety propaganda. It was really well received, and it was catchy and memorable enough that years and years, decades later, even she still can recall lyrics from it and how it went. So, how did you come up with the angle to take with a song like that, and how do you source the talent to support you in that? There's a process there, I'm sure, and maybe you have a checklist or standard operating procedure that you follow to, like, all right, so this is going to be sung by whoever, or we need backup vocals, or we need these kinds of musicians for this particular piece. Like, how does that all work?
Well, I think about what a good friend of mine said. She was a much celebrated background singer here in Nashville and has worked with all the stars. And she once told me, and I kind of live by these words. She said, "The song will tell you what to do." And when I follow that, I'm never sorry, because you have to just listen to what the song is saying. The song is saying, I am crying out for a background singer, or I'm crying out for a mandolin on the song, or whatever it happens to be. So you just have to keep listening, and sometimes you have to listen several times before you hear what the song is telling you. But that's what I use as my little guideline. I'm happy that it's served me well. And then sometimes at a certain point it becomes second nature, because you hear something distinctly. Oh, well, there's got to be a saxophone there, and I'm not listening as intently because I've come to do it so often. So many projects, so many musicians, so many singers. So, but it starts with the song. It really does.
Is there something that you're wanting to accomplish that you haven't yet, or that's kind of been backburnered and you want to get back to it?
This is kind of a retro answer, because we've been talking about Mr. Rogers. The second album that I did, which is called Thank You, Mr. Rogers, Music and Memories. It's the one that has Mickey Dolenz on it, as we talked about, and Vanessa Williams and Kelly Pickler, and all this variety of artists. Even Tom Bergeron, if you remember from Dancing with the Stars, and before that, America's Funniest Home Videos. He's on it. And by the way, he's a great whistler. He whistles on his song. I'm not quite satisfied with how things have gone for this album because it came out right about the same time as COVID. And, as you know, everything just went haywire. I'd like to see it have a relaunch, and I'd like people to start discovering it and discovering not only these great artists singing Fred's great songs, but just hearing his message in a new and refreshing way. So I'm kind of on a campaign to get it back into the public eye, and that I'm not sure quite what that form will take. It might mean going to another record label or doing something, but the fact of the matter is Mr. Rogers here forever. His birthday's in March every year. We celebrate it here at my house. I'm very, very devoted and hopeful that we can make this album work. And by the way, I brought it along with me. There he is.
Oh, that's awesome.
I know, shameless promotion, but when it comes to Fred, I can afford to be shameless, I think.
That's so cool that you know his birthday. By the way, something that's really cool I learned about from Judaism is to light a candle on their death anniversary and pray for their soul's elevation. That it really does make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
wild. So they light candles for righteous, famous rabbis and so forth on their death anniversary.
And I happen to be Jewish, so I understand what you're saying, and
Yeah.
light a candle for my parents every year. What was a Jewish boy working on United Methodist songs?
Yeah, right.
Well, it wasn't planned. I just love writing. I'm here in Nashville, and they were located here, and we had a meeting, and they liked my writing, and they never asked me if I was Jewish, and I didn't exactly say anything. We had a great relationship. They mentored me in many ways, and I mentored myself, and I think justice to the material.
Yeah, somebody who passed this year, I want to bring up, 'cause he's on your list of people that you've worked with, Gilbert Gottfried.
Oh,
yeah.
Right.
So he passed earlier this year. Anything that you want to share about him or the project that you worked on that involved him?
It was actually a song that I wrote that he was going to sing in this PBS series called Naughty. And he played Jack Frost. And they had him, made his hair all white and frosty. You don't think of him as a singer. So it had to be a song that would accommodate his vocal range and also a little style, because he was Jack Frost and he was making everything cold in this particular episode. And he was kind of proud of himself. So I kind of wrote a song that was a tip of the hat to the song Mac the Knife with Bobby Darin's great rendition of that. So I wrote a song that was called Jack Frost is Back in Town. And we gave it a big band feel, which was wonderful. He had this, I don't know whether he's ever had the opportunity to work with a big band, but I went up to Toronto to record him where the show is being filmed, and we got along great. And he's, like a lot of these comedians who create a persona, which works for them and is funny and is successful, like other people like Jack Benny, who, Jack Benny was not a cheap man. He was a very generous man. And Gilbert Gottfried was kind of like a quieter guy. So I got to see that side of him. So that's my Gilbert experience. But we had a good time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's most famous probably for voicing Iago in the Aladdin movie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And what the insurance duck?
Oh, yes. Affleck.
Affleck.
Yes, the duck, the Affleck duck. I love that duck. Yeah. I like the duck more than the gecko from Geico.
The duck is pretty funny, but he made a great living using that very familiar voice of his.
Mm-hmm. So, if to wrap up this interview, if you were to address something that we hadn't talked about, let's say a question that I should have asked but I didn't, what would that question be, and how would you answer it?
That's a great question. Well, you were pretty thorough, I have to say. So that makes it a little more difficult. I would say people who want to get into the music business or the recording business, people who want to be singers or musicians, even actors, they come my way and they want to know what I think. It's a challenge for me because I don't want to discourage anyone who has a passion. And my bottom line is, if this is your passion, then go for it. Train yourself, get to be an expert at what you do, be the best you can do, be better than everybody else, and go for it. But at the same time, I want to tell them that it's not easy. It's, a lot of people don't make it. And even though they're more talented than anybody, it just doesn't happen for them. And you have to be prepared for that. And you have to develop a tough skin. And you have to learn that rejection is something to deal with and embrace and brush it off your shoulders and keep trying. And I like to believe that eventually, the people who are persistent will achieve some degree of success. I mean, I'm not short on persistence here. I got that from my mom and my dad and, my grandparents and whoever else has influenced me. So it's worked for me. And I do believe that you have to blow your own horn sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I wish all those people well, and just, find the balance. And if it doesn't happen for you, that doesn't mean that you can't still enjoy doing community theater or writing your own songs and things like that. Not everybody has to have a #1 record or a Grammy. Grammys are great, but they make better doorstops than they do anything else, I think.
I think the main thing is to follow your bliss. And if it leads to recognition, such as an award or hitting a certain status of bestseller or whatever, that's kind of the bonus. That's the cherry on top. But following your bliss is where all the magic is, because
I agree.
It's feeding your soul. And also, I think whether you win any accolades or not over here on this side of the veil, and in the upper worlds, even if hardly anybody got their hands on your album or your creative work, it was celebrated on the other side of the veil.
And I think there's a song called "Make Someone Happy," and I think even if one person heard a song that I wrote and it made their life better, then that's probably more important than anything else. Yeah. So put the awards aside and just do what you do and make somebody happy doing it.
Mm-hmm. There's this the concept I believe is real. That's it's called the life review. When you pass back into non-physical, that your life is presented to you, but in a way that you can step in the other person's shoes and feel what it was like for them to receive the good and the bad. And imagine finding out that you saved people's lives because your music stopped them from smoking cigarettes, even though everybody in their family smoked. But they heard that song and they decided, you know what, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to be yet another family member who's addicted to this cancer stick. I'm not doing it. And you may never know until you get through your life and do your life review that you had that kind of impact on people.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, when I was writing those safety pup songs for the National Child Council, I didn't really think in terms of, whose life is this going to save? But I think you're right. It really does make a difference.
Well, thank you, Dennis. This was fun, and I'm sure inspiring for those who want to follow their bliss and their passion. And yeah, you also compose custom songs and music for different projects. So if somebody listening to this is wanting to send a project your way, You still take those on?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And how do they find
Yeah,
you?
it's amazing how people find you these days. I mean, God bless the internet. It really makes you more accessible than ever. I do have a website, and it's dennisscott.net. So you spell my name out completely, dennisscott.net. Um, and you can hear some of the things I've done, some of the songs that we've worked on. I don't know if there's a Safety Pup song there, but if there's not, I'll take care of that.
Okay, awesome.
But you'll hear the Mr. Rogers songs and other things, and I'm reachable. Some people they don't put their contact information, but I'm very approachable.
Mhm. Awesome. Yes, you are, because I reached out completely out of the blue. You got back.
No, I'm so glad you did,
Yeah.
and thank you for this great interview and for your penetrating questions. I didn't think I'd have to use my brain today, but ouch.
Well, thank you so much, Dennis. And thank you, listener. Yeah, so be an inspiration for others, and the rewards will come. We'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.